police and tactical response teams have returned with force to the streets of Diepsloot. Officers and Home Affairs officials are checking the status of foreign nationals in the area. Police Minister Diepsloot also visited the scene of a deadly vigilante killing last night. Residents protested yesterday, blaming undocumented foreign nationals for crime in the area. Our senior reporter AviweMtila is there and has been keeping an eye on that multidisciplinary police operation. It's been about an hour since we last spoke, Aviwe, and it seemed that the police was moving around, like you said, zigzagging across various areas of Diepsloot, searching people and asking for identification of some kind. How have things proceeded since then?
So, Masal, we at the footsteps of the Diepsloot police station, where the policing team that we're seeing now active is the Johannesburg Metro Police. They're the ones that are active on the ground here, just outside the police station where they're having a roadblock. The other teams have now gone back into the Diepsloot police station. I'm not sure if they're taking a break and planning to go back anytime soon, but for the time being, they've retreated. But we do, of course, understand that the South African Police Service has heightened the deployment of specialized units and resources to restore law and order in Diepsloot. We did, of course, hear yesterday that the police minister saying that they'd add an additional 50 members that would be comprising of the tactical response team as well as the public order policing to the Diepsloot police station. But now we hear today, in speaking to the Commissioner, Fanny Masimula, that number has now been beefed up by more than twice, making it 120 police that, of course, is on the ground. We've seen them ourselves, as I mentioned earlier on, that we were zigzagging with them right around Diepsloot, where a number of arrests have been made, and of course, even how they branched out. It wasn't just one convoy, Marcel. It was at least two convoys and police nyalas heading in different directions. What was quite interesting is how the police, as they're making these arrests and as they're driving around, they're telling the people to go to bed. And that was just after 8 o'clock, which is quite surprising in terms of what the rules are for Diepsloot. But of course, we're seeing that visible policing that the people of Diepsloot have been crying about, saying that it's insufficient. But the question is, of course, will it remain on the ground? Because we do understand back in 2020, we saw similar operations which didn't last. We are told that those lasted around a week and then they retreated completely.
It's quite interesting that you quote the police saying that they want to restore law and order, and local community, they would tell you what law and order are they going to restore, because they have been crying out saying that they haven't had law and order there for the longest time. I'm interested if you've been able to get an idea of what foreign nationals who are living in Diepsloot are feeling as they go into another night. I know just by going through social media, there are tweets that have gone viral, like the one I'm just about to read. A woman who goes by the handle Nomazulu Nomi says, "I'm a Zimbabwean immigrant in South Africa and I might be killed one day when I am not carrying my passport. A brother has been stoned and burned to death because he had no passport. He paid with his life." So an immigrant, whether undocumented or documented, those families must be feeling very fearful going into another night if they call Diepsloot their home.
Certainly very fearful, Marcel. As much as people don't want to speak on the ground, I can tell you what we've been seeing about that particular brother that lost his life just last night. The wife of that particular brother, as you mentioned in the tweet there, has fled Diepsloot. She fears for her safety. She has packed up and left, saying she won't return to Diepsloot. You understand that murder that happened just last night. And of course, there was a media communique by the South African Police Service suggesting that that group was on the guise, pretending as if they're part of the community trying to restore order, going in house to house, when in fact they were actual criminals, Marcel. They were criminals that were perpetrating the very crime that the community has been crying about over the weekend, a crime that seems something out of a horror movie, where they move house to house and basically demanding money, demanding valuables, also demanding identity document that they then use for nefarious reasons. We heard how these particular criminals that killed the Zimbabwean national were conducting the same crime, going house to house until they killed then we understand Elvis Sithole, 44-year-old, according to that media communique that we received from the police, how they dragged him outside his house. I remember even going in a bit earlier on to that particular area in Extension 1 in Diepsloot, where the blood stains are still outside, showing the struggle that was happening, how we are told by the neighbors he was tied up, dragged to the street some 20 or so meters away from where he stays. He was hit with hammers, eventually torched by those criminals that the police are now saying they're looking for, not a particular number. And as we heard from the police minister, that in fact the police were deployed a bit late last night, 63 members of the police deployed to the ground, and they were met with that crime and those criminals ran away. So no arrests made at this stage in that particular incident, but of course it will tell you just the fear of some of these foreign nationals living in Diepsloot. But of course the fear of the South African nationals as well living in Diepsloot, telling me a bit earlier on how relieved they are to see the police actually on the ground, snaking in the community, saying that now they'll be able to sleep much better, because they wouldn't even be able to sleep in fear of these gruesome crimes and the murders that have been happening recently.
Okay, what are we expecting from the night ahead? I know that's a very difficult question to answer, so forgive me for it. I mean, you heard the police, you said the police had been saying to people as they stopped and searched them, okay, now go to bed. One gets the feeling that it's almost an unofficial curfew that they're hoping to implement there to try and keep as many people off the streets as possible, to make life a little bit easier as they try and bring some calm back to the area. What are you hearing there is what they're expecting tonight?
I was actually questioning Marcel, oddly enough, just the legalities of some of these operations, just in being curious in terms of are they allowed to even just randomly search people in the manner that they've been doing, or even tell people that they're supposed to go home. That was about 8 o'clock, but of course those commands we understand coming from the higher officers, so that would tell you that in fact it has been given the go-ahead, and in terms of bringing restoring law and order in Diepsloot and around. While I might not be able to tell you myself what's going to happen in the course of the night, I can tell you about what's going to happen tomorrow, and that's of course the visit from the minister, Police Minister Diepsloot, coming back for the third consecutive day in a row, and of course flanked by Fani Masimula, the incoming police commissioner, also coming back for the third time. But now we're also expecting Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi as the Minister of Home Affairs, together with a team from the South African Revenue Services. That team particularly will be dealing with the issue of undocumented foreign nationals. And of course, we're also expecting the Small Businesses Minister to be on the ground, also looking how this community of Diepsloot can benefit economically and how that economic situation can be changed. Because as you'd understand, Extension 1 is literally in trying to not sound insensitive, but the bottom of the barrel when it comes to the poverty that's just around there. So these teams will be looking at how this community can be uplifted, and of course that crucial question of what you're seeing behind the heightened measures from the police, the joint efforts, multidisciplinary efforts that we're now seeing, how they can be sustained going forward. Because the people of Diepsloot say, while we're grateful for what we're seeing now, we've seen it all before and it did not last. So that question will be addressed, we were told by the Minister Diepsloot, by tomorrow, in terms of what happens then with what we're seeing. And these 120 members that have been added on, we know the 16 vans that have been added on will stay on top of the 6 that the Diepsloot police station only had.
Just before I let you go, Aviwe, I mean, what we're seeing unfolding in Diepsloot over the last few days, the people there would argue over the last few years, is a Diepsloot story, but it's certainly not isolated to Diepsloot. This is a story that we could be telling in various other areas of South Africa as well, and you have told many of those stories in other parts of, especially here in Gauteng. And what government does to try and change things is something that they're going to have to implement in those other areas as well, because like you correctly mentioned, this is not just about undocumented foreigners, whether they're documented or not. This is also about putting bread on the table, and those issues do generally go hand in hand. Just in closing, a reflection from you, if you could, on how important it is that government puts the right foot in front of the other over the next few days, if not hours.
Marcel, you're actually asking a question that I put it quite pointedly to the minister just yesterday, AviweMtila, and in fact the police commissioner himself coming in as the incoming police commissioner. You see the deployment on the ground here, the 120 personnel on the ground. You look at the police vans here, you see that they've actually taken resources from other police stations such as the Sedibeng police stations and others to just beef up more teams here. So that question would then beg, what happens to the other police stations, given that it would leave them a bit shorted? So you ask yourself then what happens, that crucial question of what happens going forward. Even the minister, AviweMtila, reflecting on when he was the police commissioner back in 2010, saying that around that time they had 195,000 police on the ground, close to 200,000 police on the ground. Now that he's coming back as the police minister, years later, Marcel, he's now the police minister, and the force on the ground is 182,000. So that's actually quite went back in terms of the people on the ground. So it's a very crucial question, Marcel, in terms of what happens. How do you then continue with these stringent measures? What happens? We understand that in the last 2 years there haven't been additional deployment of police on the ground. Hence we expected to see around 10,000 to 12,000 new policemen. The police minister suggesting that by December we'll have those policemen taught and ready to go out in the force. But really, realistic, what happens, Marcel, in terms of strengthening the lacking police stations around? Because the members, the community members here will tell you that they want an overhaul of this entire Diepsloot police station. They say it's ineffective, it's useless, murders continue here unabated. They report them, nothing happens. There's a lady that was telling me just yesterday how she's had several house breakings. These people, as they move from door to door. It's happened a number of times, and every time she reports it, but nothing really has happened. So it's not an isolated issue of Diepsloot. It's really quite a broad and wide issue in various communities, and the question really needs to be answered as to how do we tighten up law enforcement in the country.
Indeed, and thank you for continuing to ask those questions.